Introducing We Kinda Talk, a Grenadian Word Salad, my fourth book, dedicated to the memory of Alistair Hughes and Claude Francis. People often ask me, why do you write so much about Grenada? My answer is always the same. We have a lot of catching up to do. We kinda talk. This is a book of expressions, idioms, proverbs, and colloquial sayings that were an integral part of our Grenadian speech while I was growing up. It is a collection of we kinda talk. It can aptly be termed a word salad. Those expressions played a valuable role in our educational, cultural, and social upbringing, and proved to be valuable sources of information. A number of the sayings survived and are still regularly used in everyday Grenadian talk, while others have become rare. In this book, I resurrect rare expressions and the sayings coupled with everyday utterance, and I insert my stories and poems here and there to bring more clarity to the expressions. Please note that many of the sayings are written in ways that they were actually spoken, and for authenticity, I did not look to proper grammatical forms. The words that sprung from the mouths and pens of people in Grenada came from far and wide. When combined with commonly used local terms, a rich and informative assortment resulted. I am not attempting to document every saying and expression, and I am not endeavoring to establish their roots. That, indeed, can be quite a task, better suited to the experts in the field of linguistics. Same with the spellings. We do not have a standardized way of spelling words and expressions in our dialect. We have adopted many words, made up some, and we have spiced up a number of the words that filtered into our speech. You will find that in We Kinda Talk. There were also variations in the way words were pronounced. You will note as you read that I use both I and ah, as well as yer and yo, and can't and can. This is deliberate, for there were different ways in which words were used to bring out the very same meaning. The same could be said for a and ah. Now, this is not a research document, please note. So much of what is written here stems from my memory. I welcome suggestions and corrections. Please note, I welcome suggestions and corrections. You will realize that there are expressions written in the correct formal English grammatical form, while others are broken English, slang, dialect, or colloquialisms. And this is a true representation of the way words were used in our everyday Grenadian speech. We mixed up our expressions, and we often went from what is called the Queen's English to dialect in one sentence. At times, we spoke words used by Robert Frost and William Longfellow, then suddenly burst into our local expressions. You will notice that as you read We Kinda Talk. The question is often asked, why French words and expressions are not more predominant in Grenada today, seeing that Grenada was under French rule for over 112 years. There are those who put the blame squarely on the shoulders of the British, who, after gaining control of Grenada from France after the Treaty of Versailles, embarked on a deliberate effort to obliterate as much of the French influence in Grenada as possible. That included the French language and the French patois. If the French patois had survived, as did many of the French names, places in Grenada, it will still be flowing off the lips of Grenadians. It must be noted that many of the places in Grenada, however, have retained their French names despite the vigorous attempt by the British to alter that. The British, for instance, renamed the town of Guave to Charlottetown after Queen Charlotte, but the resilient nature of the people of Guave did not allow that name to take root. However, names like Montjaloux, Grandance, La Digue, and others still exist in Grenada today. The effort to stamp out the Frenchness include the patois of bastardized French, as Alistair Hughes puts it, was not totally successful. The popular term "go to France" was a British verbal outburst signifying disgust when dealing with people on the island who spoke the French patois. A number of French-speaking patois people, Grenadians, instead, they headed for Trinidad during the late 18th century. They took their French patois with them. See the connection there, eh? Grenada and Trinidad. Even today, Grenadians use the expression, "go to France," when they want to chase people away. Boy, go to France. Generations of older Grenadians did little to ensure the continued usage of the French patois when they limited the language to speaking to each other, thereby excluding the children from what was known as big people talk. By doing so, they denied the younger ones the chance to listen and learn the French patois. It is not surprising, therefore, an abundance of British idioms and proverbs survived. Africans were enslaved and imported to work on the estates in Grenada. They brought with them words and customs that had their mark on Grenadian language, but almost disappeared in the course of time. A small number of East Indians came to Grenada, indentured servants. East Indian terminologies did not have a greater impact on the Grenadian lexicon, probably because of their small numbers. We are, however, familiar with words like roti, dal puri, acha as Indian foods. Ron Sukram, in his book Indians to Citizens, the Indian Community in Grenada, 1857 to the present, wrote the following. The Indian community is the largest minority group in Grenada. The group was first introduced during the second half of the 19th century, when Grenada experimented with indentured labor. By the second half of the 20th century, Indians were so integrated into Grenadian society that a distinct Indian cultural identity was generally invisible. In addition, Indians were involved in every aspect of Grenadian life. Grenadians traveled to places like Aruba to work in the oil fields and to Panama to help construct the Panama Canal. They migrated to Britain, the United States, Trinidad, Cuba, Jamaica, and other Caribbean islands. Those who returned brought outside words and expressions which found their way into Grenadian talk. The following example illustrates the verbal mixture. Kojo went to Toot Bagay restaurant where he had a tittery fish cake and a roti. He met his compe Philip and they decided to take a stroll up Fort George to breeze out. The mixture. Grenada became a place where even biblical sayings were intertwined with local Caribbean and American expressions. I must acknowledge certain people for their interest and work in trying to preserve the rich language that evolved in Grenada. I refer to individuals like Claude Francis, Alistair Hughes, Thelma Phillip, and Cadwell Taylor. Alistair Hughes, a renowned journalist, was aware of the history behind the words, while Claude Francis was an educated businessman. Thelma Phillip, storyteller, spent much of her time promoting Grenadian folklore, dialect, and culture. Cadwell Taylor, a master of the creative use of Grenadian dialect. The following is a quotation from Claude Francis. I found that our dialect was a mixture of English, French, and additions of people coming back from working in Spanish-speaking countries like Panama, Venezuela, Cuba, and Costa Rica. He further asserted, words were both mispronounced and changed. I found that all this needed clarifying, and each word had a story behind it. It showed, please note people, it showed that language was a living thing. Our language gives rise to humor when words are misused in our dialect because they sound like English words which have a completely different meaning. Someone picks up a cutlass and says, well, I go salaka, I go salaka you, you know. Humor comes from knowing the background of what is being said and seeing all the errors and double meanings. The English word disagreeable comes to mind. Somehow, the popular version of the word become disagreeable. Your grandmother said, boy, you too damn disagreeable. Upside down, upside the down. Claude Francis made the point that knowledge of the dialect is essential. Please, people, note this. Knowledge of the dialect is essential to unlock our history. Many sayings were drilled into our heads by parents and teachers, and they were meant to admonish, teach, inform, scold, and warn or instill wisdom. Our elders were sociologists and philosophers in their own right, though many of them did not have the education that some of us have today. Yet, they were full of wise expressions and sayings. Many of the sayings cause us to chuckle or bust out laughing, and you go laugh like hell in this book, I'm telling you. And expressions seeped into our countries, doctored over time, idioms spiced up, and others got the spice when spoken in the rich Grenadian cadence. Some of them even came from the popular American movies and songs and were adopted into Grenadian use. I live in Brooklyn, and I often hear words by people from the Caribbean that differ slightly from those I knew. There is a broader Caribbeanness in the language of the Caribbean diaspora that is worthy of investigation. One might ask, what it is about idioms and other expressions that is so important? I point to the great lessons that can be learned from them. The history and culture of the country are revealed in the way people think, the way people speak, and the way people write. This compilation, We Kinda Talk, is a contribution to the documentation of our Grenadian identity as expressed in our language. I hope my readers find it both educational and entertaining. Anthony Wendell DeRiggs.